Hey there guys, Josh C with Seppel and welcome to my final thoughts on Crash Bandicoot for the PlayStation 1. First up, a little bit of my history with this game as well as the original trilogy. I played the second and third game before I played this one, and this is a blind playthrough that I did of Crash Bandicoot. Now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started on what's good about Crash Bandicoot. One of the things that I feel like Crash Bandicoot really does well with is the music. The music in it just has such a fun, lighthearted charm to it. The music also works well in combination to the level design. Not necessarily, how the level is designed gameplay-wise, but really the visual aspects of the levels. If you're in a jungly type level, the music will definitely reflect that, and you will feel that while playing the game. It makes you feel just a little bit more convinced of the world of Crash Bandicoot, and it gives that little bit extra bit of fun to each of the levels. The music is also very memorable. Once you hear the music from certain levels a few times, you'll start to remember it from then on, and then whenever you hear it outside of the game, you'll remember that that is from Crash Bandicoot, and I think that's a real big strong point to this game. Now, moving away from the music and going towards the visuals, this game came out early in the PlayStation's lifespan, so the fact that visually it still stands up today is a pretty big feat. A lot of early PlayStation games just don't hold up. They don't. They were really impressive at the time, but they just don't anymore. I mean, heck, some PlayStation games that came out later don't even hold up still. I mean, for as great as Final Fantasy VII is, visually it doesn't hold up that well. It doesn't look good. So for Crash Bandicoot to still look good to this day is pretty cool. It shows that artistically they knew what they were doing back then. Now, one of the big things about this game that is hit or miss are the levels. Now, I sat down and actually looked at the levels and separated them into three categories. Fun levels, which I would say are levels that are really fun to play. Ones that you don't mind playing. The ones that really are memorable. Bad levels that just are not good for a big reason or many small reasons. And then the just there levels. The just there levels I consider levels that aren't really that fun, but aren't difficult and aren't bad. They are just there. And it turned out there was a lot of fun levels in Crash Bandicoot, or at least that I thought. Some notable examples that I really felt like pointing out are Toxic Waste. It really is just a short level, but it just elicits a fun response from me. The camera perspective really does hurt it a little bit, but it's something about just dodging barrels and the fact that the level can be over in like a minute. It's a really fun level. Another one is Lights Out. The concept of this one is really cool. Aku Aku is now a light source as well as a protector, but you can't get him to, the full Aku Aku invincibility, which, kind of sucks, but it's still a fun level, especially with the thought that your light will diminish if you don't get to Aku Aku fast. So you get this whole, I have to balance getting the Aku crates as well as my light source, and you gotta focus on which pitch you need to jump over. And it doesn't really throw too much towards you. There aren't too many unfair pits, I feel. And there's generous checkpoints, so that level's pretty good as well. Another one that really a lot of people online complained about, and I don't understand why, is Slippery Climb. Well, now that's a little bit unfair. I do understand why. Because it's a very challenging level. It's got many platforms that snap down, turn into slopes, fall away. There's a lot of pits and spikes. It's a very challenging level, but that's why I like it. It's because it's so challenging, but it doesn't overstep its bounds. Everything is within perfect reasoning. It's challenging, but fair. And that's why I feel like some of the, the hate towards it is really unjustified. It's got problems, but as we'll see later in this video, the game itself has a lot of problems. But Slippery Climb itself is not the worst level, which seems to be a lot of people's consensus. Now that's the end of what I feel like are the really good parts of Crash Bandicoot. So it's now time to move on to the bad parts of Crash Bandicoot. Alright, starting up, a minor bad part about Crash Bandicoot. And I say minor because it's a problem that just affects all three of the original Crash trilogy, and that's the camera. The camera is not that good. It's fine when you're doing the 2D segments, but whenever you're doing the segments that are behind Crash's back, and you're running forward, or if you're running towards the camera, it's awful. And the only reason I say it's minor is, like I said, because it's the same problem with Crash 2, and it's the same problem with Crash 3. They didn't really seem to be able to fix this by the time Crash Warp came out. It did get better, but it was never fixed. The first major issue I had with the game is its controls. Now this was released before the DualShock had analog controls. It didn't have the joysticks, so you do not have the option to use these even if you have a controller that has one. So you have to use the D-pad, and it's not good. The controls feel very, very clunky. Almost kind of like it's grid-based, even though it's not. And that really kind of affects it. It sometimes feels like you fight against the controls about what you want to do, and it's never really clear about what Crash is absolutely going to do. Sometimes I felt like Crash would keep walking when I didn't want him to walk, and I would have to push back in order for him to stop, but then he would just turn around and go walk the other way. So it's not fun to fight the controls. It became an even bigger problem whenever there were levels that required precision platforming. If you had to land on a small space, it really felt like if you fell off, or if you overjumped it, or if you undershot it, it wasn't your fault. And that's the sad part about the controls, is that a lot of times you just felt like it wasn't your fault, because it was the controls. And that fits perfectly into the bad levels. Now, like I said, I sat there and I looked at all the levels that were good, bad, and just there. And some really notable bad levels were the hog levels. I didn't really think the hog levels were that good, and that was mainly in part because the controls were so clunky. And for that one pillar in Hog Wild, but, minor. But the hog levels just didn't control very well, so they weren't as fun as they could have been. Like in Crash 2 with the polar bear levels. They had fixed the controls at that point, and it was much more fun to play those. Another one is Sunset Vista. Now this level, it kind of goes along with Slippery Climb. It's a very challenging level, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not complaining about the challenge of this level. I'm complaining that it's too long. Slippery Climb, you can finish in 2 minutes, and that's if you screw up. Sunset Vista can take you upwards to 10 minutes if you screw up. And that's if you're lucky. Sunset Vista is just too long of a level to be that challenging. It should have progressed in the challenge, but instead it really kind of beefs it up. One section near the beginning is you have to dodge flame. There's a fire that will constantly keep burning, as well as bats that are flying back and forth. Now the problem with this is its timing. You have to avoid the flame, jump on the log behind it, and avoid all the bats. The flame will go out, you jump on the log, but the bats get in the way constantly. By the time the bats circle through, the flame's back, and you can't continue. You can take out the mother bat that's next to you, but all that does is just slow the bats down and really screws up the cycle. So sometimes you're sitting there waiting just for a chance to be able to make it through. Most of the time, you think you'll make it through, but then you'll just die to the bats when you try to jump down onto the log. Another notable level is the lab. Now this one's not too bad when you actually figure it out, but the one thing that I really have a problem with are the slimes, or the blobs, or whatever they are. They constantly respawn. There is no getting rid of them. And you can't spin into them. They'll just spin you back. You have to jump on them, but they jump towards you, and you gotta time it right. And The blobs are a very annoying enemy to deal with. And another annoying enemy in this level to deal with is the scientist, just because it can be kind of confusing when you first deal with them to figure out their pattern on the shocking part. If you can't figure that out, you're going to have a problem getting past them. The other bad level that I would really suggest is the Road to Nowhere. My biggest complaint with that is the fact that it exists and that it's actually in the game. Now, for the most part, a lot of the levels in Crash Bandicoot can just be beaten in a couple minutes if you play through it properly and you don't really screw up too much. They're pretty short levels. Not all of them are very long, like Sunset Vista. The biggest problem that comes from them are the enemies. Now, not every enemy is awful. There are some that I feel like were unfairly placed, but overall, the enemies aren't that bad. It's just that some of the enemies in this game, their design does not reflect how you're supposed to defeat them. Like the shielded natives. They have a shield in front of them, and they'll bounce you back if you hit the shield. I thought that if you kind of egged them on and had them walk towards you with their shield, and when they turn around, you hop back and spin into them, you'd kill them, but that doesn't work. Despite their back being exposed, you can't attack them in the back. You have to jump on their heads so they pull their shield up and then spin into them. That doesn't make sense. His back is exposed, why can't I attack him? Or you could take, for example, the lizards. They have horns on their heads, very spiky horns. So you would think jumping on them would kill you because, you know, spikes hurt. Spike on the head would hurt. But if you try to spin into them, they just bounce you back. What you have to do is jump on them. Like I said, you would think jumping on spikes or horns would hurt you, but no, that's how you defeat them. The most confusing enemy though, the hands-down most confusing enemy is the weird floating orb thing. Not the projector, but the floating orb thing. It has what looks like a little eye on the top of its head, but it has spikes all around it. So naturally, I thought, you can't spin into it. I thought you had to jump on it, because that's where it was exposed. And it really only shows up in the 2D side-scrolling levels. So, I tried jumping on it. No, that doesn't work either. It doesn't matter what you do to this enemy, you just can't touch it. Its design does not reflect that you can't touch it. The spikes on the side show that you couldn't spin into it, but there was nothing on top to say that you couldn't jump on it. All this confusion from these enemies, it caused me to not know what enemies were actually killable and which ones weren't. And that's a problem. When you don't know what enemies are killable and which ones not, it just becomes trial and error. Not just trial and error to see which enemies are killable, but how they're killable. So far, all these bad parts of Crash Bandicoot do not compare to this final complaint, this final issue. The save system. The save system in this game is atrocious. It is unforgivable and inexcusable. It is hands down the worst thing about this game. You cannot save the game unless you complete a ton of bonus level or collect a gem, which requires you to get all boxes in a level without dying once. In theory, this sounds like an okay idea, but in execution, it does not work out. To put it in perspective, this game came out in 1996, 9 years after the American release of The Legend of Zelda for the NES, and The Legend of Zelda had a more competent save system than this game. This save system should have never made it into the final version of Crash Bandicoot. This is something that they should have tested before releasing the game and been like, alright, this doesn't work, get rid of it. Honestly, the save system probably wouldn't even be that big of a deal if they didn't reset your lives to 4 lives every time you started up the game. The only reason that I could actually think of for why they implemented this save system was because they didn't want people to use cheat codes to say that they 100% this game. Which, if that's true, is not a very good excuse. It's just not. Basically, all the good and the bad for this game, it boils down to that this game has not held up well. This game is 20 years old now, and it's not as playable as it was when it first came out. visually and audibly, it still holds up, but the enemy designs and the BS save system, it's a real big hurdle for this game. And it just kind of hurts new players playing it. So I would really just say that if you're not a fan of Crash Bandicoot, and this is like your first Crash Bandicoot game, you want to start with the beginning, I would say play it. Maybe not beat it. Beat it if you really enjoy it, but just play it. It's definitely held up enough to say that it is worth playing, just not 100%ing. If you are a fan of Crash Bandicoot and haven't played this game like I was, then I would say, yeah, play it. Definitely play it. Because it gives you a better respect for the sequels and what they brought to the Crash Bandicoot formula. All the extra abilities, the better maneuverability on Crash, the better level design, the better enemy designs, and of course, the save system. Now, none of this means that it's a bad game. I would never say that Crash Bandicoot is a bad game. Never would. So now I've got basically my thoughts on the game out of the way. Let's go ahead and talk about what it was like to Let's Play the game. I would say, despite all its flaws, overall I had a lot of fun Let's Playing this game. Even though I have problems with it, I kept wanting to come back and play it. Which, like I mentioned in the bad section of this, the biggest hurdle was the save system. It was just really difficult making sure that I was able to save the game so that I could turn it off and be able to pick it up in another recording session. That really was the biggest problem with recording this. There were a few times that, despite I saved the game, my progress didn't save. But then, on the other hand, there was that one time that I saved the game, it said my progress didn't save, that I would have to do the lab over again, and then I beat a level and suddenly it said the lab was beaten, and I could just walk on by. That was really confusing. Overall, just the save system is really confusing in this game. That's all I had to really talk about the Let's Play of the game. Like I said, the game's fun, but it's got a lot of big flaws. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching my final thoughts on Crash Bandicoot for the PlayStation 1. If you want to see my previous final thoughts video, which was on Shadows of the Dam, click right here. I don't know where I'm going to put it, so I'll just be vague. So click right there. If you want to see my Let's Play of Crash Bandicoot, which I've also already done the second one, you can click right there, probably underneath where the link to Shadows of the Damned is. Anyway, if you like this video, make sure you like it. If you want to, feel free to comment. And I may be a little bit biased in suggesting this, but why not subscribe if you're not subscribed? But that's it for me, so I'm going to head on to the next thing, whatever it may be, and I hope to see you guys there.